Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mr. Constitution Classes. Ron should be here shortly. If you're just picking this up and want to get straight to the class, fast forward about 12 minutes and we will jump right in. In the meantime, I will try to keep you entertained. How's everyone doing today? If anybody asks me that, it will be an interesting answer because yesterday I managed to spill water on my keyboard, which means I had to drive to the computer store today. And I just got the phone call that it's going to cost about $1,100 to get a new screen. So that was a lovely present for the day. If you guys can check out my background, I finally got my studio built. I'll be trying out different backgrounds, and you guys can weigh in on which one I should use permanently. But yeah, I finally got the studio set up. No more hamster ears. I got a mic. I've got ear pods. And what else do I have? Oh, I got a digital camera, so I got a better view. So it's now at eye level. Anyways, so I'm going professional, it looks like. So what do you guys think? Like the background? Okay, I'll move so you can see it. That was a war hamster. It was gifted to me by somebody on one of my other social media places. I think it was Patriots.win. I got about 20 or 30 of those icons, so I'm going to play around with them all. But hey, Chris, how are you? We spring ahead and it stays here now. No fall back. That is my understanding. Did I pass that? No more daylight savings? Is that right? Thank you, Jen. God, I hope so. Daylight savings drives me nuts. One of my favorite days of the year is December 21st, winter solstice, because after that, the days start getting longer again. Kind of feels like you're walking downhill. And then we hit June 21st. It's sad. I do like it when it's light out into the evening. That's one of the best things about being down in the Caribbean. Is you get a few more hours of daylight, seems like. All right, so Derek says it's confirmed. No more daylight savings. That's beautiful. What's in his hand is a flaming sword with arrows. And the other part I like is, here, let's do this real quick. See the whole thing. The one thing about this office, it is very cramped. This green screen is right up against me. And I don't have a whole lot of room I can just reach right here and I don't have a whole lot of room to move around. Gotcha. Anyways, what's going on in the world today? All kinds of good stuff. Shooting down American drones. Apparently the U.S. summoned a Russian ambassador, and Moscow is denying that the story took place like the Americans did. And I just don't know who to believe. It's an interesting one. God, we had so much big news last week, and they wanted to talk about anything but the stuff that matters. The Missouri versus Biden case is getting very interesting. They're getting all kinds of depositions. Apparently, we've got some footage about the certain event that took place on the certain day in January a couple years ago. That's getting very interesting as well. What else did I see today? I was so busy working, I didn't really get to check in on the news. So let me play a little catch up here. Did we give any more money to Ukraine today? Trump is beating DeSantis in the GOP primary, according to CNN. Oh, the banks. You guys probably want to talk about the banks. All right, so this is an area I can talk a bit about. Silicon Valley Bank got its doors shut over the weekend. What would happen? There's a lot of misleading stories out there that they got bailed out, and that's only partially true. what happened was they were they were a bank with about $50 billion in deposits a year and a half ago. And they took in about another 130 billion in deposits in the last year and a half. A lot of that had to do with all the money tech firms were making during the lockdowns, et cetera. Well, when you take in an extra 130 billion, you've got to give out loans, and no bank can make enough loans, to cover that. So what they did is they went out and bought treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. And the buffoons at Silicon Valley Bank did not hedge their interest rate risk. And anybody worth their salt in finance should have known you do that. You use interest rate swaps. They didn't. And so when interest rates went up, as they were inevitably going to do, because the government printed a whole bunch of money, which caused inflation, that interest rates go up, the prices of the bonds go down. So a lot of these bonds were trading about 72 to 77 cents on the dollar. Well, that shows up on the bank's balance sheet. And you have to have capital reserves. And if your assets go down in value, your reserve ratio goes down. That makes you appear to be close to an insolvent bank. Now, sometime last week, Peter Thiel led a group of investors and basically pulling some money out of there. And at the same time, JP Morgan's private bankers, started poaching Silicon Valley Bank's clients. And hi, Doug. And they started poaching Silicon Valley Bank's clients. And all of a sudden, their deposit base is just dwindling very fast. So Thursday morning, although they have more than enough assets to cover all the deposits, they don't have enough liquid to cover any more depositors taking money out. Therefore, they got to run on the bank and were forced to close. Now, 97.3% of the deposits Silicon Valley Bank were not insured by FDIC because there were amounts greater than 250K. That's what everyone was worried about. Well, I found out over the weekend. I got Kleiner Perkins is an investment banking firm, and somebody leaked a memo that they wrote and was talking about how the liquidity would work. So in just a normal bankruptcy, they would have been able to sell off enough bonds to pay off every single depositor within 30 days, and it wouldn't have been a problem. The problem is some of the depositors wanted their money out now, whereas in yesterday. And that's where the Fed stepped in and told the FDIC, look, we know that we have these assets. They're going to be sold in an orderly process. And therefore, go ahead and front these deposits some money. Now, it still is a bad thing to be doing. It gives the appearance of a bank bailout, even though no taxpayer money is likely to be lost, because it makes other banks think they can do the same. The bigger picture, though, is all this regulatory mess we have makes it gives a big competitive advantage to the too big to fail banks, the JP Morgans of the world. And what they're doing is they're swallowing up all the mid-sized banks around the country. We're going to see huge consolidation in the banking industry. There's going to be more smaller banks. As their deposit base leaves, they're going to be forced to close. And it's only going to benefit the big banks. And that's what's really in play here, is a power play. So there you have a version of it that you probably won't hear elsewhere. Hey, Doug.
Hello, sir. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'll have my laptop back tomorrow, and I'm only going to be $1,100 poorer. That's what happens when you're clumsy. So
you're using another computer you have, a backup?
Yeah, this is the Lenovo Windows based I was using. I got the studio set up on that today, so at least I had something to work.
It's kind of schizophrenic, isn't it? Having one that's Apple, one that's on Windows.
Well, you got to see my Mac, because I'm running everything on the Mac side, and then I swipe the keyboard, and it switches me over to my virtual Windows machine, which I have on the back end. And then I run all of one business off of Firefox, and then my other business I run all of the Brave browser. So I basically have 5 systems. You want to talk schizophrenic? That would be it.
Yeah. As for the banking thing, especially when everybody's talking about hang on a second, got to get the Dr. Pepper open. All of that. I bank at a credit union, so I'm kind of in a different animal. Mine's a very large credit union, Navy Federal Credit Union. So it's kind of a different animal. The reason why this came to mind is Darren in the chat room basically said, well, all banks invest, and that's true. But the investments that a credit union has compared to what a bank would have are different. Credit unions purposely don't invest outside sources. Their investment is in their members. So what they make is through their fees, their loans, things like that. There's no board that gets a check. There's no board of execs. I shouldn't say execs, of stockholders that have stake in the bank that have to be paid. Stuff like that. So it's a different animal, and it's exactly reasons like what's been going on recently that I've always happily stayed with the credit union, aside from the fact that I don't have any fees on my checking account. I can take it all the way down to zero, all kinds of stuff. But in my case, my time in the Navy, what got me in there. Thing about credit unions is there's a membership. You need to fit certain criteria in order to be a member. But watching this, I had to. I felt like I had to lead a few people away from the ledge today, gentlemen, in one of my classes, because it's like, they almost sounded like the individual that preceded us, there on Patriot Soapbox a couple days ago, pull all your money out, run for the hills, everything's coming down, and like, whoa, wait a second. I have spent time talking to people and looking into things, and while I'm not the expert that some of these people are, little banks, there's going to be some issues. Chances are, there's no guarantees in life, but chances are your larger institutions are going to be fine.
Let me address that. This is different than 2008 and 9, where there was contagion, and the contagion was all these banks were insuring each other's credit default swaps. So when one of them went down, they were taking the other ones down as well. In this particular case, all of the banks are subject to the same rising interest rate, which means falling asset prices in terms of the bonds. But they don't necessarily insure each other, although they do credit default swaps. Insurance swaps. Interest rate swaps is the word I'm looking for. So if those start to pop, that's where the contagion risk is, and that takes down the whole system because that's a $500 trillion plus market. That's not in play yet. So what you are going to see is more small and mid banks having challenging asset balance sheets, and but they're not necessarily, one doesn't impact the others. A lot of these guys are smart enough to hedge their interest rate risk, and it's easy to do. I do it for my clients who buy TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. The interest rate goes up. As interest rates go up, so does your dividend yield. Therefore, they maintain their price. That's what you should be investing in. If you're tax sensitive, you can use MIPS, Municipal Inflation Protected Securities. And real quick caveat: I am not giving financial advice. This is general knowledge. So,
yeah, you kind of have to do that. I know. Just like people are always asking me for legal advice, and I have to throw in there, I am not a lawyer. I cannot give legal advice. But as a constitutionalist, here's what I think.
Yeah, well, I have to, because I do give financial advice for a living, so I have to give the caveat. I am not doing that right now. I'm talking about general factual knowledge. Hey, Ron.
Right.
You all know where I stand.
He wants the whole darn thing to come crumbling down, but it's not going to happen yet.
The whole thing is going to come crumbling down.
Eventually. It was built on a house of cards.
It is a mathematical certainty. All fiat currencies, no fiat currency in the history of the world has ever survived.
That which cannot be paid back will not be paid back. The debt cannot be sustained. At some point in time, there's got to be some sort of a monetary reset. That is inevitable. It is a mathematical certainty. It is just a matter of who is in charge when it happens.
So I almost feel like Ron Partain is getting ready to sing a song like, I've got a cryptocurrency in my hand. Oh, wait, no, it's not like a computer. Oh, wait, no electricity. What do I do? But then again.
Well, that's where a lot of people get, you think people think that if you have cryptos, and I am not an advocate of many cryptos at all. I'm an advocate of the technology, of the blockchain technology that is going to be utilized by the coming system,
like blockchain,
not necessarily specific cryptos. Although I am a big XRP holder. Everybody knows that if you know me. But I have much more I mean, I don't keep a lot of money in the bank. I keep a very minimal amount of actual money in the bank, and I have cash, and I have gold and silver, and then I have another precious metal that's associated with the Second Amendment, and yeah,
Yeah, lead,
but
copper, and steel. Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
Ron does absolutely the correct take. I do have concern for a lot of the cryptocurrencies right now. A lot of it has to do with the other bank that folded, the other two banks, Silvergate here in San Diego, and also what's the one in Citizens Bank? I think is the one in New York. These were the two biggest banks in the world for converting crypto to cash. Well, that's no longer possible. These banks are out of business.
right.
Their crypto assets were not good. They were not what they said they were. They took a lot of really bad risks. What concerns me are the stable coins, because these stable coins are supposed to be pegged to the dollar, which means they've got a dollar bill for every coin they issue.
That's correct.
Nobody believes that is true.
No,
The
they're
people
not.
who started the stable coins have got really shady backgrounds. So how are you going to buy crypto now if you can't convert it back to cash and vice versa? The market.
Well, okay.
Just,
So, allow me to say I'm in full agreement with what you're saying there. And when I say that I'm invested in things like XRP and XLM, these are the ISO tokens. I Those are long-term investments. I'm not going to be able to, unless you have an off ramp to be able to convert that into liquidity to go into the system, or unless somebody accepts that as payment for something, then it's basically just numbers on a. It's just you've got a device. You've got a device that is full of something that is only valuable to somebody who agrees that it has value. But the to your point, I just think that people who are leaving their money in the bank, a significant portion of their money in the bank, are really playing Russian roulette. If you go to Team 17, if you look at the boards in Team 17, when they talked about Watch the Water, I said this 100 times. I firmly believe that what they were talking about was a liquidity crisis, and that is exactly what we are headed for.
Well, on that note, I will tell you, I spoke with a childhood buddy of mine who is a banking analyst for a very well-renowned asset management firm. We spoke on Sunday, and he's basically analyzes the bank's balance sheets, and he says that most of the major banks' balance sheets are the strongest they have been in 20 years. That we are walking into this from a position of strength.
Well, okay, but what happens? What happens if I mean, they may have that currency on hand, but what happens if the dollar is no longer the reserve currency of the world?
The dollar loses about 20% of its purchasing power, but that's really just as a markdown across the boards. And you can basically, the problem is there's so many moving parts. Like I said, the biggest systemic risk are the interest rate swaps, and there's over 500 trillion of those outstanding right now. And that's just the ones we know about. The over-the-counter market's probably another 60% of that. If a major bank is unable to pay off, or perceived as unable to pay off what it owes on an interest rate swap, that interest rate swap net exposure becomes gross exposure. And all of a sudden, overnight, you have a 500 trillion or $250 trillion hole in all the bank's balance sheets, and that cannot be plugged. So if any major player were to default or to get in trouble, they can take a bunch down with them. That's where the risk is.
And another thing is that in 2008 we had the bailouts, right? Well, it's basically, as you correct me if I'm wrong here, but the government is not going to do another bailout. And I know they bailed out SVB, but
they did not.
They did not bail them out. What they did is they did a power grab.
Okay.
What they did was SVB had enough assets that could have been liquidated in an orderly manner to pay off every depositor within about 30 days. What the Fed did is we're just going to front that money and let every single depositor, especially our buddies in Silicon Valley, have their money on day one. It was a loan That was not a bailout.
Okay.
Because all those assets will be sold and the taxpayers won't have spent a penny.
Okay. But my what
Help
I'm
out all
talking
their friends in
what
low
I'm
places.
but what I'm talking about is that they this is, I think what we're going to be seeing is we're going to be seeing situations like what happened in Cyprus in, what was it, 2013, where the banks do bail-ins.
Yeah, well, that's what he's talking about. Is basically if you're a depositor, they're going to take some of your money to pay off the bank's debts. That is actually illegal in the United States of America. We've got legislation to prevent that. That being said, when does that stop these people in DC from doing what they want? And they are not going to let their banking buddies, become bankrupt. If something like that happens, there will be something unprecedented, or they will use that to usher in their global digital currency.
Well, I think that is that certainly is part of the end game. But I also believe, if you listen to the speech that Trump gave at CPAC, and what Bannon said preceding him, I tend to feel like a lot of this stuff that's happening now, well, I think warp speed was not about the thing that they put in the arm. I think I truly believe that warp speed was Trump accelerating the printing of the currency, because I think we have about a five-fold increase in the currency in the year 2020. So, by increasing the money supply and by doing that faster than what the powers that be, or call it the deep state, want, what you're doing is they had their plans are their planned collapse of the system was accelerated.
That be that as it may, we don't have any evidence of that, so I'm going to say, okay, that's conjecture, and perhaps it's true. I want to just address Darren real quick. He said, where did they get the money? It's a bailout. Now the Federal Reserve's got plenty of money. They can just summon it out of thin air if they have to. But it's like you're in college and you say, hey, Dad, can you lend me? I can't cover rent, but I get paid in 30 days. Can you give me some money up front, and I'll pay you back. That's all it is. That money is there. These bonds have market value. It just takes a few weeks to sell them in an orderly process. There was never any taxpayer risk, besides 30 days of interest, what have you. And with that, how about we talk about the Constitution?
Okay.
So everybody, see what happens if I don't feel like talking a whole lot? I just bring up a topic, man, and they go. Welcome to the program. Hi, guys. So at 11 after 3, and I was here actually relatively early. I didn't go to lunch with my class like I usually do. It's raining in Southern California. I was on the phone with my mom in Arkansas. She says, wow, you guys get a lot of rainy weather out there in California. I said, yeah, tell me about it. We might actually get up to, I don't know, 15 inches for the year.
Well, we could certainly use it. That's for sure.
Well, no, because it just goes straight to the ocean anyway. What we need to do is store it. It doesn't matter how much rainfall happens. For the most part, we don't have the proper storage facilities because we have the idiots destroying them, opening them up, and then anyway, that's another conversation that could take a while to talk about.
I agree.
But anyway, that all said, boy, I tell you what, I will say this. There was a handful of times while you guys were talking where I'm thinking, man, Alan Myers would love to be in on this one. But I see you grinning, Brady. You know for sure, right?
Well, we not only did we go over it on Sunday night with Alan a bit, and Doug doesn't give himself enough credit. You follow the conversation better than the layperson, so you always call yourself a layperson in these conversations, but you're not giving yourself enough credit. Alan and I also talked today on the phone as I was driving back to my computer repair store, and we got into this a little bit more, and we do have a good time getting into the weeds of finances.
Yeah, on Sunday on For the Republic, it was Alan and Brady and I, and what he's saying about me not giving myself enough credit is I knew that I was in a room with a couple of giants when it came to understanding this stuff, and so I relegated myself to a layman. It's just no different than the person in the crowd. Now I do recognize I probably know, or at least follow it better than the average bear, but then again, most of the average bears don't know which restroom to use, so it isn't saying much. But no, I am more than happy to say this is not my avenue. It's definitely yours. I'll stay in my lane, but my lane is the Constitution, and I tell you what, we are quite a ways through Article 1, Section 8, and we might even with the loss of about almost 15 minutes, we may even finish it today. Article 1, Section 8, I mean, not the Constitution. And so that said, we are to the part where we start talking about the military. So we've talked a little bit about letters of marque and the post office, all that jazz. So let's get to the part where, and here's the thing, and Ron may actually agree with me on this. What we're getting ready to read is proof that the Navy is the most important military service of all. He's got the Navy shirt rocking. I say that, and guys in the service is like, what? Hear me out. So remember, at the beginning of each of these clauses is the word to, T-O, in Article 1, Section 8. That before that word are 5 other words: Congress shall have power. I'm not a fan of Congress having the power. I know what they mean by that. They have the power to make laws regarding this. But I want to be careful with the word power. It is a power they're given, though, so I know what they mean. But anyway, so they have the power to raise and support armies. But no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. So now this is very important because you'll notice then on the next line it says to provide and maintain a navy. There's no limit. There's no term of 2 years. It's just perpetually a navy. Now, first of all, we have to recognize the time period, and the same is true today, although it's not as big of a deal. Is that we are, in a sense, isolated in the world when it comes to most of our trading partners, and back then, pretty much almost all of our trading partners. All of our trading partners were either in Europe or they were like the West Indies or something like that. So the ocean, that's our trade route completely. We are not in Europe. We're not able just to send a truck to the next country over today, or back then, I guess, a wagon. So our trading is done via the shipping lanes. And so a navy was absolutely important and necessary when it came to protecting those shipping lanes. But there's also more going on here. To raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. Appropriation of money goes through a process, a legislative process in the Congress. Because it has to do with money, it must originate in the House of Representatives. The House must approve it. The Senate must approve it. The President must sign it. But it must begin in the House. This is, of course, as we talked about before, the House of Representatives is the voice of the people. You have the House of Representatives, voice of the people. They're democratically voting in those representatives. And you have the U.S. Senate, whose members are being, at that time, appointed by the state legislature. So it was imperative to the writers of this document to make sure that the Army had a check against it, a monetary check. If the people are nervous, they can starve it of money. No money, no Army. And the reason behind this is because there was a fear of standing armies being used against the people by the government. This is what Britain had done to the colonists. The Redcoats became this force that was pushing the empire's will upon the colonists. This is what we see in history. The military is used against the populace, and tyranny is then supported through fear. Now, here's what's now I'm going to say something that I don't know if either one of you, Brady kind of has heard me say this, but I don't know if Ron has really heard me talk about this. So we're afraid of a standing army. We're afraid of a force being used against the people. Therefore, there is an appropriation of funding, which must be initiated by the people, of that is limited to 2 years. When they say that they feared, or they said that they feared a standing army, did they only mean persons in military uniform? No. We have many standing armies being utilized to this day. They're called federal agencies.
Mm.
And here's the interesting thing. They don't have a 2-year limit of funding. In fact, their funding's unlimited. The standing army being used against us has unlimited funding. Why, they're even more important in the minds of these critters than the Navy. So I just wanted to put that out there, because don't forget, later on, about 3 clauses down from here, it says that Congress shall have the power to provide for calling forth a militia to execute the laws of the Union. Well, if it's the militia's job to execute the laws of the Union, then why do we have all these agencies? And why are they executing the laws of the Union? These standing armies.
Why, indeed. 3-letter agencies.
You know, it's funny because I and Stephanie, who's in the chat room, let me know about it. And it's funny because there's a gentleman out there who has something called Tactical Civics. And it's kind of making its way. And she is actually one of 2 people who's brought it up to me in the last few days. And what's funny about it is I got to looking into it. The guy who created it is someone who we used to be on each other's shows and knew each other really well and hung out online. We live in different places, but online we kind of hung out. David Zuniga. And this goes back like 15, 20 years. And so I've been trying to get back in touch with him, and Stephanie's going to get me back in touch with him. She's got an email address apparently that I don't have. But, and in his Tactical Civics, he hammers on 2 things. Number one, the militia is supposed to be the ones executing the laws of the Union. Number 2, county grand juries. I call them civil grand juries, and I actually do bring them up on rare occasion. I don't bring them up a whole lot because right now we've got bigger fish to fry. There's other things we need to do, but they are important. Civil grand juries, county grand juries, or maybe we should just call them citizen grand juries. These are grand juries that are different than the ones that are attached to the courts. These are grand juries of the people who can investigate, can inform bodies of government, and so on and so forth. We do have 20 civil grand juries in California. One of them in County Riverside, and I have a friend of mine who has served on it before and is getting ready to possibly serve on it again. And you're on the grand jury, though. There's some very strict rules about it. But grand juries was something that the early Americans used quite a bit, along with their committees of safety and the militia and so on and so forth. But anyway, to get back to the point, now let's get back to our original topic. I didn't mean to sidetrack that, but I felt it was all important. So the United States Army is what is being referred to here. But it says raise and support armies. One might then assume that Marine Corps, Air Force, all of that might fall under that since it's plural. Others might say that the Air Force, the Coast Guard, and the Marine Corps and the Space Force are not technically constitutional because there's no mention of them as an authority in the Constitution. Personally, I would like to see an amendment that codifies them in the Constitution. That's just me. Grand juries are not of your peers. That is correct, Darren. So anyway, so we have a worry about standing armies. So we're going to limit the funding. The Navy provide and maintain. But then the next line below those 2 says to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. This today we know as the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It is up to Congress, and Congress created the original one, and they've added and subtracted and changed, don't ask, don't tell, and all that other garbage that they've messed with it with. But this is the rules and the laws of the regulations of the military. When you're serving in the military, you are there to protect and defend the United States Constitution. And the Constitution is very important to you. and you have the same natural rights as anybody else, your freedom to exercise your rights is a little bit different in the military, because there's a certain level of training and discipline and all that must be put in place. The way I like to explain it to help people understand is, could you imagine someone in boot camp saying, well, wait a second, sir, what about my freedom of speech? Yeah, that'd go over real well. So yeah, there's a kind of a different set of rules for the military for a reason. We have the greatest fighting force on the planet because they are strict rules. We expect strict military discipline, or at least we expect it. I'm not necessarily so confident nowadays, but
I was just gonna say, are we sure we're still the greatest fighting?
Yeah, there's a few things that some of my friends who are still in the military bring up to me, and yeah, but Stephanie, I definitely need to get in touch with him. So thank you if you can connect me and David. But when you do, tell him Douglas V. Gibbs, political pistachio, because I wasn't Mr. Constitution back then. I was political pistachio only. That's how he'll remember me. But anyway, get back to I'm looking at the chat and answering that too for those of you who are watching later going, hey, what's going on here? All right, so we have the Army, we have the Navy, we have the ability to have a central army by a central government under the federal government. What could go wrong?
Yeah, I got a question.
Brady, real quick, we've been going through these anti-federalist papers, and I'm really starting to like the anti-federalists more than I used to. But anyway, go ahead, sir.
I would agree with that. There's a lot of arguments they make that we've got the benefit of hindsight, and
this is true.
Yeah, so it makes it a little bit of a difference. Now, one of the things the founding fathers insisted upon was that the military was going to be under civilian leadership in the form of the president. That's not that doesn't appear to be the case with the three-letter agencies, and I think that just may be a problem. I mean, sure, they're all part of the executive branch, but I mean, we just saw the FBI spy on the commander in chief.
They kind of operate independently, is what you're saying.
Well, if you spy on your commander in chief, if that's not treason or insubordination, I don't know what it is. If it's not the commander, but
yeah,
they always talk, but you always hear this talk about, well, the FBI, it's under the DOJ, and they have to be independent from the president, even though the president names the AG, and it always seems to work that way some of the time. But anyways, I just thought it was interesting, did a little bit of difference.
Yeah, and the other thing is this: we go back to the preamble of the United States Constitution. What does it say when it comes to our defense? A common defense. This was not to replace the militias. This was not to replace local defense forces. This was to create a common defense for the country. The states still have the ability to defend themselves against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But this common defense was really for the same thing that everything else that the federal government does. Getting back to Federalist 45 by James Madison, for external issues, for the invasions or the defense at our border or overseas, sending our Marines from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. This force, the military, was never intended to be used domestically. Tim says that David was on with Scott a week ago. I have Scott's phone number, and I could text him or call him. So thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. But anyway, that's what this is all about here, is a common defense. This does not replace the militia. And as we notice with the next line down, Congress shall have the power to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Now, if Congress has the authority to call forth the militia, then who else do they belong to? The militia also belongs to the states. It's funny because we were reading Anti-Federalist number 9 on Sunday, and the person who wrote Anti-Federalist number 9, who went by the pen name Montezuma, which once again, Brady and I kind of got a chuckle out of that because it was saying a lot. And he mocked this. Says, hey, they're not our militias if you can call them forth. And now you're saying also that you can use our militia to enforce your tyranny against us. And to be honest with you, the purpose of this was exactly the opposite. It was protect against tyranny. If the federal government is trying to push tyrannical legislation against the members of their various states, which is going to come across more threatening? First of all, an agency, a standing army, or militia member that's a citizen, soldier from your own area, your neighbor, your friend, your family member, whatever. Number one. Number two, if you read the Virginia ratifying convention, this is a conversation that comes up quite a bit. Who is the militia? What is their function? Who runs the militia? Who's the local commander of the militia? The militias were set up into county units. The commander-in-chief of those county units was the sheriff. Sheriff takes an oath to the Constitution, but is elected by the people. He serves the people and is bound to follow the Constitution. And if the federal government is asking him to enforce or execute a law through the militia that is unconstitutional, then that militia and that sheriff has a choice they can make. That choice could be, no, we're not going to do it. We are part of the citizenry. We recognize a tyranny. So for their sake, we are going to stand against this tyranny. We're not going to execute it. That is, I think, a key part of what this is saying. And also it helps us understand what the militia really is. The militia is more than just some local military unit with a bunch of citizen soldiers with their muskets, or in today's case, an AR-15 or whatever, thrown over their shoulder. They are, in a sense, our last line of defense between us and the federal government, and our connection to our county sheriff. And I don't think people see that anymore. In fact, what's interesting to me is of the 50 states, only 24 have state militias. We need to bring back the state militias. There needs to be a state militia in every state, and there needs to be a state militia unit in every county of this country. Mm-hmm. And these state militias are not just a military unit. These are your communities defending themselves, standing firm for themselves, being involved, and operating in a manner that, if necessary, tells the federal government, no, you're not going to do that here. We're not going to carry that out. Leave. Any comments or questions, gentlemen?
I wholeheartedly agree. But I absolutely agree. I think we need to have that. But I'm probably I'd be on some watch. I'm probably already on a watch list.
Oh yes, you are. There's no doubt about that, Ron.
But anybody who's not on a watch list is not doing something right.
Yeah, I'm still upset though that the Southern Poverty Law Center hasn't decided I'm a terrorist yet. But I'm working on it. But when it comes to these militias and all of that, there's a gentleman by the name of Bryant who typically attends my Marietta class and sometimes heads on out to Carlsbad, and he has been saying now, and he says, thanks to me, for quite a while now, make the militia great again. So we got a couple of hats we need to create there, Brady, between the militia and the enumeration doctrine, right?
There we go.
Yeah, so there's nice red hats with the white lettering, make them look like MAGA hats, but they actually say make the militia. I wonder what would happen if I walked in with a red make the militia great again hat into certain locations.
Well,
could be interesting.
You got to figure out how to pronounce it first. So at least my make the enumeration doctrine great again. Actually, MEDGA actually sounds like it almost was a word. And it comes to it just seems to me that didn't we just about 2 years ago see our militia used against the citizens?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that when we're building fences, and when DC looked like a occupied territory, that's exactly what was happening.
Yeah, and all because a bunch of citizens decided to exercise their rights that are enumerated in the First Amendment. All 5 of them. If you really think about it. Yeah, Congress shall make no law, by the way, is the first words of that First Amendment. Just saying. All right, so Darren says they inquired about the state militia and never got a response. Yeah, I'm guessing either your state doesn't have a militia or they had no clue what you meant. Now, the militia is mentioned at whitehouse.gov, but they call it the State Defense Force. In your U.S. Code, the militia is in the U.S. Code, state militia. And it is defined. And make our militias great again. MOMGA. That's not bad, Tracy. And so if you look it up in the U.S. Code, though, here's what you'll notice. You'll notice that the militia is defined as having 2 parts: the organized militia and the unorganized militia. So the organized militia would be your state militia. And according to the U.S. Code, also, I'm not necessarily in full favor of this idea, but because I think they're more military than militia, but the National Guard, the Air Guard, the Naval Militia, and a few other groups are also listed. Then, under unorganized militia, it is asked, well, who are the members of the unorganized militia? All of those who are not members of the organized militia. In other words, the rest of you. Now, in the U.S. Code, they do give a few other things, other criteria that you would need to meet in order to be a member of your militia. Now, you guys served in the military as a veteran. You're the upper age that you could be to still be a member of the unorganized militia is greater than what would be if you weren't a veteran, things like that. I guarantee you, though, if the feces hit the rotary blade, no one's going to care about any of what it says there. Now, personally, while the U.S. Code defines the militia, I don't buy their definition as well as I buy another definition. My favorite definition actually comes from somebody I trust, somebody who was at the Constitutional Convention, someone who, though, did refuse to sign it because it didn't have a Bill of Rights, a guy named George Mason. So after the Second Amendment was around, George Mason was asked, well, who's the militia? He said, the whole of the people and a few office holders. So even then, it's only a few of them. Didn't trust the office holders even back then. But the whole of the people, we are the militia. Yes, there's an organized, there's an unorganized. When it comes to the next part, it's referring to the organized part of that militia. But you got to remember that the communities back then weren't like they are today. You know, you've got a community and it's surrounded by forest and dangerous things, animals, and the local populations of
lions and tigers and bears.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, my.
Oh, my. Don't forget about them engines. Oh, did I say that out loud? All right, fine. I'll use the proper name. So don't forget about the savages. No, that's not right either. Actually, my grandmother grew up on a reservation, but that's beside the point. But I'm not Elizabeth Warren, though, so don't start playing that game with me. But yeah, my grandmother grew up on a reservation, and she used the word Indian.
Speaking of which,
she was happy to be off the reservation too. She hated the res.
Did you guys hear that Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris are not speaking? Kamala will not return her phone calls. Liz apparently said she refused to endorse Kamala as Joe Biden's running mate in 2024 in an interview over the weekend. And she has tried to call Kamala a couple times to apologize, and Kamala is not picking up the phone. So basically, we have 2 Indians fighting.
Oh, man.
YouTube's going to pull this one down.
Pretty quick. Yeah.
You started it, Doug.
I did. All right. So anyway, Hey, we're talking about history here, aren't we supposed to talk about history as it's told? Oh, that's right. They're also banning books and censoring and changing literature, what it says. Just ask Roald Dahl. But anyway, all right. So now, next part. Remember in the Second Amendment where it says a well-regulated militia? What is a well-regulated militia? Now, today's knuckleheads will tell you, well, that is a collective body, and those are the only people supposed to be armed. You know, collective bodies that are approved by the government because it's regulated, so it's controlled by the government. That's not what they meant. We're regulated to put in good order. So a well-regulated militia is a militia that's in good order. Well, how do you put the militia in good order? Because it sure as heck wasn't during the American Revolution, was it? Many of them didn't have shoes, socks, uniforms, didn't know how to march. Now, the regulars, it was better once that George Washington put together the Continental Army, the regulars, but there were two forces, by the way. There was the militias that remained, and they were just, hey, they were there because they decided to be there. There was no enlistment. But the Continental Army, the regulars, they would actually enlist. And they would have uniforms, and they would be trained and all of that jazz. But the militia was kind of a wild bunch. And it was disorganized. They were all over the place. Didn't always listen. Didn't always follow. And they were often, sometimes, when it really got hairy, quick to desert. I don't mean to eat dessert. I mean as in running for the hills and into the trees. And so they learned from that experience while writing the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that there's a problem there. Our militias need to be better organized, better trained, better equipped. They need to be, well regulated, in good order. But how do you do that? The next part, which was written before the Second Amendment, this is what's very interesting about it. Explains it for us. To provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may, possibly, in other words, be employed by in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. So Congress provides saying, okay, this is how we want them organized. This is what we're going to arm them with. We're paying for it. Here you go. Here's the discipline. I've got a couple of friends that are in the state militia here in California. They have to buy their own uniforms. But they have an option of using their arms or the arms issued to them. I think it's both. But nonetheless, Congress is given the authority to say, hey, let's make sure this militia, at least the organized part of it, is well organized. Well organized. Jeez Louise. It is a well-regulated or in good order militia. And that's what this section is for. Notice, though, that it leaves the training and the officers and all that to the states, because the militias belong to the states first. But they can be called up by the federal government to serve. Now, that said, friends of mine in the militias, they tell me that most of the time when they're called in the actual service of the state, more often than not, it's because there's some type of natural disaster or flooding or something going on, and they're tossing sandbags. But they know what they're there for. They know.
So I've been giving this one a lot of thought lately. You know, if we were to go back to a proper foreign policy and not have a standing army and not be occupying foreign nations, et cetera, and stop with our nation building, just went back to, staying out of wars with foreign entanglement, the army would be disbanded and we would have these militias.
You would only need the army. What happened after the war between the Revolutionary War, was they actually did disband the Army and the Navy for a little while. And then they realized they might need it for something else because there was things going on, so they brought it back together.
They didn't disband the Navy, did they?
Yeah. They didn't have any ships. They disbanded it for a while, except for a handful of vessels they used for trade routes.
So
But the majority of it was disbanded.
Yeah, I knew they were still fighting piracy, so they had to have something.
Yeah, there was still some vessels they were using, but it wasn't what it was. Let's just say during conflict.
So my question is, okay, let's say this happens. We've got all our troops back home. We've disbanded the army. and there's a need for an actual war of intervention. We're not worried about being invaded, but the American public decided, there's some injustice being done in the world, and we do have to create an army again. Well, we're not going to have the weaponry if the states are just running militias, because they're not going to be able to afford the development of all these advanced weapon systems.
Or maybe they would, because they weren't giving all their money to the federal government.
Would they? Yeah, it would take a lot of cooperation between the states to maintain a defensive force.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons why they realized they needed a common defense. Is you did need the states all kind of contributing to this one force. And so, yes, in the long run, ultimately, absolutely, it would be uniform and have better resources and all that ultimately. So I think you're correct there. But anyway, go ahead.
No, that's really it. It's just, I've never had a whole lot of concern about the United States being invaded because of our geographical advantage and the fact that we've got more, our civilian gun owners are the most powerful military in the world. Right. It is not a very good idea to invade the United States. But if we don't have any kind of a standing army or anything like that, we're not going to have a nuclear arsenal if someone else is. And that kind of solves that problem right there.
Well, and what's interesting, too, is they being the enemy out there, realize they don't have to invade the United States militarily. They decide to invade us culturally.
That is true, and a long conversation. So let's not do the rabbit hole. I didn't want to open that one up, but yes.
No, but it definitely needs to be said. And I know everybody's already thinking it, but yeah, we're being invaded culturally. We have a foreign ideology, foreign ideas that have been inserted into our system. The enemy literally walks the halls of Congress, and a lot of them don't even realize that they are giving aid and comfort to the enemy or participating in an enemy invasion. That's what's interesting about it. Okay, next part. Now that we've gone through the military and the militia, we're going to get to something very interesting. And this is where I almost wish I had a whiteboard for this class, but I'll draw it the best I can with my words. Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square. What district? District of Columbia. Washington, D.C., the seat of government. It says to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may by cession. In other words, is being given of particular states and the acceptance of Congress. So the states involved and Congress must accept this, become the seat of government of the United States. Seat of government meaning that is what its purpose is. It is the seat of government. Its purpose is none other. Now, while Washington and Madison hoped it would be a commercial center as well, its purpose was the seat of government, and it was not intended to have a population. Not a permanent population, just those who are there for their job, but they really have residency in another state, but they're there to serve and so on and so forth. And what it's saying is that Congress has the authority to exercise all authorities inside that. So, if this was being followed to the letter, then inside that square of 10 mile, they could not put up a stop sign without Congress proposing it, voting on it, and the president signing it. Well, that could be a little inconvenient, I suppose. And over time, what happened was also persons did begin to show up and live in that square and around it. And after 1862, when Washington, D.C. outlawed slavery, which I've always found curious, because I've been told all my life that the quote-unquote Civil War, which was actually not a civil war, it was a war between the states, was fought over slavery. If it was fought over slavery, why did its capital in the North, Washington, D.C., wait a year after the war started before abolishing slavery, if the war was about slavery? Just a curiosity. Anyway, so what happened after 1862, the reason why I brought it up, is then as escaped slaves started heading north during the war to try to get away from the South or the fighting or whatever was going on, the fact is, in the North, the northern states, the Union, which was, we're told, fighting a war against slavery, well, the states north of Washington, D.C., hung on to their slavery, even though they're part of the Union that was fighting against slavery. Boy, this war about slavery narrative's dying really fast, isn't it? And so Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, these are slave states, but they're part of the North. So if you're escaping the slavery in the slave states and the Confederacy, and you're headed north, and you hit Washington, D.C., who had abolished slavery in 1862, a year after the war had started, and you know to the next step, if you keep going north, is another slave state, even though it's a part of the Union, you're probably not going to keep running. It's sort of like, certain games we played as kids, and there would be the safe base. If you ran to the base, that you could not be tagged, right? Well, Washington, D.C. was that safe base, that safety zone for those slaves that are escaping. And you know what? The politicians didn't mind so much because there's no population in Washington, D.C. And there's all kinds of weird stuff going on, like a war. And they have no problem with people who now have newfound freedom and are seeking to find a way to make money, and they're willing to make the beds, wait the tables, shine the shoes. It became kind of a symbiotic relationship. So Washington, D.C. suddenly began to have quite a large population. But up to that point, and still to that point, it says in the Constitution, Congress exercises exclusive legislation over that district, over that city. Eventually it changed. When I get to the war between the states, I'll get into more about this. But that's what the quote-unquote Organic Act of 1871 was about. It was to allow an area, a district, and the city that formed around it to have its own government, take care of its own business, not needing an act of Congress to put in a stop sign and things like that.
So I kind of like the way it was before. If Congress was actually believed in the enumeration doctrine, 99-point-something% of the bills they do talk about would be outside of their prerogative. And I'd love to see them tied up arguing about stop signs and stay the heck out of our business.
Yeah, that might be appealing. That might be an appealing feature of that original power. I agree. All right. Now, second part of this paragraph. Not only does Congress have the authority to exercise exclusive legislation over Washington, D.C., but also to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. In other words, if the federal government's going to own property, it needs to, first of all, the assumption is that it's property that's owned by the states, because, see, the states are supposed to be the ones that own territories. That's the reason why the Northwest Territory screwed everything up. Maryland basically said it was out of the Union if New York and Connecticut and Pennsylvania and Virginia didn't give up their hold on the lands in the Northwest Territory. They felt it was unfair for those states to be so big. And so Northwest Territory wound up going over the federal government. And really, now that said, Northwest Ordinance was actually written and passed before Constitution, but the idea was that the central government wasn't supposed to own land. Well, here, what it says in Article 1, Section 8 is, if the federal government's going to own land, it's got to pay for it. It's got to be approved by the state legislature. It's got to be for needful buildings, meaning buildings that are being used for authorities granted to the federal government, like a dockyard, like a military base, or something of that nature. I don't know the number of acres, but I do know this. West of the Mississippi, the federal government owns more property than all of the United States east of the Mississippi. All the lands.
Well, yeah, that's why that's where the other BLM comes into play.
Yeah. The Bureau of Land Management. Well, you remember Bundy, right? Bundy Ranch?
Mm-hmm.
Bundy was right, to say it nicely.
Mm-hmm.
So now the question is, if the federal government, well, what about national parks? That was seized. Monuments, that was seized. States didn't have a choice. Federal government says that needs to be in a national park. It needs to be protected. So we're taking it from you. Okay.
But it was progressive, Doug. It says progress. Why do you hate progress so much?
See, this is what I got to put up with in Carlsbad, Ron. See what see what he does. His sarcasm is absolutely incredible.
No, I'm the same. I'm the same. I that's, you had to put up with me in Corona.
Yeah, this is true. What was bad about that is people like Dennis and Ed would then jump in the wagon with you. But anyway,
I had to deal with people like Karen, though.
I don't even know who it is. It's just the name alone made me cringe.
Actually, she was a really nice lady, but she
was a wonderful lady, but yeah, she wasn't
just misled, or just, you know.
Yeah, there was a handful of times I felt like a referee between you guys. But anyway, government owns 2% of New Hampshire and 94% of Nevada. Devil Dog says, "Thank you, Devil Dog. That's awesome. Thank you."
Stephanie asks, so was the Organic Act unconstitutional? Referring to 1871.
There should have been a amendment changing the legislation and how it was to be distributed. So yes, technically it was. But for that reason, there's other arguments regarding that Organic Act that I'm not going to get into right now that are not only unconstitutional, but they're actually historically wrong and not accurate in what it meant or what it was about. But that's a different discussion for a different time. So now, the question is, well, some of this land, how was it taken? Some of it was extorted. Go back to Nevada, 94% of Nevada. Hey, Nevada, you want to be a state, huh? Well, we're going to hang on to this land, this land, this land, and this land. And if you don't give it to us right now, we just won't grant you statehood. Your call. Was the state legislature in existence to give their consent at that point? No. So it violates this clause. Bundy basically said, "Hey, I'll pay. My animals are grazing on this land. It's government land, and the government's saying you need to pay a fee for your cattle to graze on this property. I'll pay the state because they have a right to that land, but I will not pay the federal government. It's not their land. They have no authority. So BLM, the federal government, will not get any fees paid by me for my cattle grazing on that land because they have no claim to it." He was right. All right. Now,
just because we were talking about BLM and whatnot, I just thought I would just share this because this has something to do with BLM.
Huh. Not the BLM I was expecting. Well,
no.
Maybe it was. Well, and there's a lot of woke policies that probably also indirectly contributed to this problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me just touch on that. Something that's not well enough known is in 2008 and 9, when the banks were negotiating with Obama and more importantly Eric Holder, not only to get bailouts but also to the non-prosecution of the banker criminals. What they agreed with, what Holder extorted them to do is to implement all of this equity and diversity hiring practices in the banks, and that's why we see what we see today with different people getting deplatformed by major institutions. The banks control a lot of corporations or can influence them, and that's why this happened over this whole cancel culture over the last 2 years. That's why it occurred. This is it's directly from the 08 and 09 bailout discussions that happened behind closed doors.
1,000% agree. I mean, well, I should. It's not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. It doesn't shock me whatsoever because nobody. I think there was only like one person who was ever prosecuted for anything that went wrong with 2008.
No, and I actually did a presentation on that. If you go to my channel, look for the Bank of International Settlements deal, how they're above the law. Basically, with the prosecution of HSBC was about to happen, and basically a couple of British bankers, the Bank of International Settlements executives, they sat there and had a meeting with our Department of Justice, and they came out of it where they basically parroted Goldman Sachs' opinion that Bank of International Settlement regulations superseded U.S. law. So I say a coup occurred that day. That was 2012.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, Article 6, Constitution and the laws of the United States are the supreme law of the land. Well, the laws of the United States that are pursuant thereof, pursuant to the Constitution. But yeah, so no international entity law or anything like that can supersede it. So yeah, that's. And they talked about that during the Virginia. If you're going to read any of the ratifying convention notes, Virginia should be the first one. And
New York should be second.
New York should be second. Pennsylvania third. And then North Carolina after that one. North Carolina's is pretty good too. All right. Well, gentlemen, we're at the top of the hour. I'll get into the next clause, which will take half the show anyway next week. Because the next clause, necessary and proper clause, the left calls it the elastic clause, because you can stretch it in any way, shape, or form. That is the foundation for Hamilton's implied powers idea. So we're going to talk about that next week.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to miss next week. It's one of my favorites.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Since it's raining, that means I got to go all the way around. I'm not going to use the Ortega, which means I'm adding about 20 minutes to my drive, 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah,
about an hour and a half to get over there. So I got to get out the door as soon as possible.
Drive safe. Roads are nasty.
Yeah, I got to hit the road here shortly too. But hey, I got some new content on my new Rumble channel at Brady Fox, FOXX. Check it out. I actually put our For the Republic Sunday night show up on my channel. I talked to Alan today about starting a For the Republic Rumble channel so we can just do it directly there and not have to put it on our own channels, but that should be coming up soon.
Nice.
I also spoke at a school board meeting last night and did okay, which is something I did not think I would ever do 5 years ago. So that was fun.
Awesome.
Very good.
I had I'm going to be with Nino and Jim Willie on Thursday, and then next Monday I'm going to be I get to interview Richard Gage.
Okay.
Hey Ron, just popped into my inbox your Untold History channel, Busting the Narrative. You guys talk about the liquidity crisis and the SPV meltdown. I am going to watch that today, and I will critique the heck out of you to make sure you got the banking stuff correct. But I'm
sure I wasn't. Well, I wasn't really. I wasn't sharp as a tack because we did this yesterday. I wasn't very sharp about the whole thing.
He's backing up really fast.
No, you guys. I don't think you guys know this, but Sunday was the 1 year anniversary of my dad passing. Okay. So I wasn't really.
Wow, it's been that's a fast year. It doesn't seem like a very long ago. No.
I was going to say the same.
Yeah, so I wasn't really on top of my game yesterday. So,
and I've had the pleasure. I had the pleasure of meeting Ron's dad over the phone, and he was a very nice gentleman. And my condolences to you, my friend. He was He's a good man.
I had the pleasure to meet him in person a few times. My father in May will be his anniversary for his death. It'll be 24 years for the death of my father. But anyway, all right, very good. Great to see you guys and appreciate all you do. It's always fun to be here, but I've got to run out the door. So United we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. We'll see you next week.
Drive safe.
See you, Ron.
Better.
So, Ron, do you like my studio setup? You didn't comment.